Tech Talk with Matthew Dickerson. Matthew Dickerson. Tech Talk. Sit back and relax. It's time to talk technology.
Hello, gadget fan gorillas in our midst. It's time to step out of the murky darkness, take a deep breath of the fresh, cool air, and feel the virtual sunlight on your face to get a large dose of what's good for you with another mint condition episode of Tech Talk with Matthew Dickerson. And here, just like a beacon radiating through the blackness, it's Matthew Dickerson.
We do need that applause, don't we? That canned applause or cheering.
I'm trying to build it up, and I'm imagining it. I can hear it in my own head.
Each individual listening to it will be cheering loudly in their head, and then we add all those together.
Perhaps they'll just breathe like and make that crowd sound.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, I've got to find some crowd noise to add in there afterwards.
Okay.
So the question I have this week, it's one that I've often pondered. What is technology? And the reason I asked that question is I was doing a bit of work around the house during the week. And many, many years ago, when I was much younger than I am now, I used to do some crawling around in tight spaces, running network cabling, that type of thing.
Oh, and terrible on the knees.
It's terrible on the knees.
Yeah.
And I used to see these Nancy's, these wusses that would have knee pads. And I'd... You're not a serious tradesperson if you're going to have knee pads as you crawl around. Meanwhile, I go home and put my knees in ice at the end of a day of crawling around the ceiling.
Right.
So I had to do some work, and I knew I was going to be on my knees for a little bit of this, and I went, I don't know if I want to talk about it here.
Oh, you wussed out.
I wussed out.
Well, can I share with you? You're in good company. I will not crawl around in a confined space without knee pads now.
Right, well...
It's just not worth the pain and the angst.
Let me say they are like pillows for the knees. It's wonderful. I bought ones that have got a flat platform and gel filled, and I put them on, and they're a bit uncomfortable standing up because they're not really designed to be standing up in. And then you kneel down and you go, that's luxurious. I'm going to kneel more often.
They're slippers for my knees.
I remember we used to go to mass, and there used to be some of the pews where you'd kneel down, they'd fold down. Things. Some had padding, and some didn't.
The luxurious ones did. Or
That's
you
right.
had to work out where to sit.
Well, you had to leave them to your mum and dad or to some of the priests or the nuns that might come along. So you mostly got the timber ones, but every now and again you get the padded ones. You go, wow, that's great. But these... They weren't gel back in those days, in the church days, but these knee pads. So my question is, can I call that technology? Is technology something like that?
I think absolutely. Any tool that we use that makes your job easier or life better for you, that has got to be technology. I'm calling your knee pads technology.
Well, that's good.
There, I've made the ruling. Bang.
Because I felt a bit wussy, but I thought, well, maybe this is technology I'm using here, so maybe I can get away with it along those lines.
Embrace the knee pad and, bring it into fashion. Start wearing around.
That's right.
Yeah,
they are a bit clumsy. It's a bit like wearing cricket pads. They're not that comfortable to be running between the wickets in, but you don't want to be facing up to a fast bowler without them on.
I just think, when you're crawling around, as you said, in confined spaces, the time that you can do that, your longevity doing that is very, very short if you're not in knee pads.
Yeah, that's right. Anyway, I've embraced them.
Not worth the trouble. Yes,
for all those people I called names years ago, I'm sorry. They're really good.
Yeah, bring on that technology. All right, folks. Well, here's something. Have you ever tried foie gras? Today, we're trying a new product. It's called Forged Gras. Or Forged Gras, and it'll make the geese lovers among us much, much happier. It's some 21st century delicacy, and it's coming to a plate near you, but further on that later. Next, we're looking at new ways to fly. We're going all the way back to the drawing board and leaning into nature for the details. And speaking of flying, what an excellent segue into our first story. So, how are you feeling about flying cars these days? Is it something that you can see yourself doing at some stage or other in the future? The word is that they're easier to fly than a plane and much, much easier to fly than a helicopter. In fact, would you believe that with a few days training only, you could be soaring over the rooftops just like Santa Claus. Matt, I've just finished 120 hours of driver training with my son. Are you going to tell me it would have been less trouble to get a flying car?
Absolutely. And it is hard working at the 120 hours. It's a long time.
And just imagine if you had twins or triplets.
Oh, yeah, that's
Heart
right.
Goes out to
that's right. At least with
to any parents out there with multiples.
That's right. Well, we had a couple of years between, as you have as well. But, yeah, having twins, trying to get them through, especially the highway travel, when you're limited to certain speeds on the highway, that's hard work. It takes a long time
you
to
can
get
rock up some hours, if you're prepared to be patient there. But, you've got to be very patient on that highway.
You do. So it is interesting. And I do actually, speaking of which, I remember when my eldest daughter, so no experience with driver training, first thing was get your oil plates. So we went down one morning before school. RMS opened nice and early, so we went down there, did the written test. That's easy. At this stage, you can get behind the wheel of a car with zero experience. But by this stage, my daughter was 16, turned 16 that day. She had spent, well, I'd probably say 1,000 hours or more in a car with us while we've been driving maybe downtown or to school or to sport or on holiday. So surely, if you've seen all that driving, you'd be okay. So we got home, she got her school gear out, and we said, let's go.
I know where this story's going now, yeah.
Yeah, well, she got in behind the steering wheel, she started driving, and it was horrific. After 2 corners, I said, pull over if you can do that safely, and I'm going to swap over because I need to get you in a big car park somewhere where you can't hear anything. It was scary. So it doesn't actually work learning just by watching something unless you maybe
I
a
don't
robot.
know how you do it if you're in the city.
Yeah.
But with some of the country roads, we got quiet streets out the back, not real country roads, but just quiet streets out the back. There, you've got the scope to make some errors without getting into too much strife.
Well, car parks, big car parks from shopping centres is where we end up going to say, right, let's just get the hang of this, because you don't think about it. We've got lots of skills as a driver, but you don't think about it. You just turn the steering wheel that much to go around that much of a corner. We know that innately because we've done it for so long, but when you've never done it before, you don't know how far to drive. You don't know how far to push on the accelerator pedal or the brake. So it's a scary thing.
And as a instructor in the passenger seat, you've got to be so sedate. You've got to be You can't, if you start yelling, that's going to make the driver even more frantic, and you're going to get in more trouble. So hit the brake, please. We're going to pull up now.
Anytime soon, before that car comes into contact with our car. One of our kids, actually, we went to a car park in Sydney. We thought it would be a good idea, don't know why, to drive a little bit around Sydney and then going up into a car park in a shopping centre. And it was a pretty steep driveway, a sharp turn, then up the steep driveway.
End up being like the Dukes of Hazzard?
No,
you get airborne?
She didn't. No, luckily she didn't do that. Quite the opposite. Got about 3/4 of the way up and just went, I can't see over. You know when you're getting the top of a ride, you can't see over? And she went, I don't know what's over there. And she kind of stopped and then just froze and then burst into tears about 3/4 of the way up this ramp.
This is a bad time for tears.
That's right. Please don't do this. And that's not the time, apparently, to yell and go, no, keep going.
But
let's get on to the story.
If you're in a flying car.
Oh, I know. That sounds even scary, doesn't it?
You've got another dimension to worry about.
Do we think that we know that time travel, apart from 1 second per second, time travel at different rates to that is possible because obviously someone from the future came back, created the Jetsons cartoon, and then said, there you go, give it another 50 or so years and you'll be right. George Jetson with his flying car, although I don't think, remember it was the Aero car, I think it was called, but it folded up into a suitcase. Remember when he jumped off there? And then, so we're not getting that far at this stage.
Okay.
We might be a little way away from that. But the flying car is absolutely a thing. Now, there's a company in the US, in Silicon Valley, of course, and it's called Pivotal. Pivotal. Now, they've got a flying car at the moment. Let's not call it a flying car. Let's call it an eVTOL, correct name. Electric Vertical Takeoff and Landing Vehicle, eVTOL. So
it's a flying car.
A flying car, okay. And they've got one called Blackfly, another one coming out next year called Helix. But they say that you can fly this after a few days of training on a simulator.
That's amazing. On a simulator?
On a simulator. So you get on a simulator, they do this for you, and it's funny, isn't it, when you buy a new car from a car dealer, they don't say, right, we better put you in a simulator and train you how to drive. They assume you know how to drive.
Yeah.
This was quite interesting. I read some stories about people who had zero experience at flying. Not they dabbled a bit, they had a little try in a light aircraft, some say zero experience. And within a few days, they were literally flying this thing. And it's a single cockpit, so you're not putting anyone else at risk if you're doing it, except maybe someone that you fall through their roof. But they do some training in the simulator.
That's amazing.
And then they say, a bit like a drone. And I've got a drone. I don't know how to fly a plane, but I've got a drone. And I went, okay, there's 2 knobs there. One takes me up or down. The other one I can move into a horizontal direction with. So, here I am flying a drone. But, of course, you're not really, because the computer is doing all the work to fly the drone and keep it up in the air. You're really just saying, can you go this direction? And it says, sure, I understand that, and I will now make things happen to satisfy your request to go in this direction.
And so you're going to suggest that the computer can also sense when you've overcorrected or you've made too much of a move, and it becomes dangerous then, so it dampens that, perhaps?
It simply won't do the things you do if you tell it to do something crazy.
So no doing flips just yet? Or
no, unless you say there's a button there that says disengage automatic. No, there isn't that there, but that's what you need.
Well, what are the modes that Tesla's got? Yeah.
That's right.
Right, okay.
You'd need to be able to have some way of saying, okay, disengage all the fancy electronics and let me fly it. Oh, no, it's out of control now. But essentially, it's got a whole range of things, including things like auto land. Now, imagine most times when you're flying a normal aircraft, anything that's going to go wrong would go wrong at takeoff or landing. They're the dangerous times. A bit close to the ground at those times. Up in the air, you've got time to recover maybe. But when you're coming down to land in this, for example, once you get to about 20, 30 metres off the ground, then it says auto landing, take over. So you don't need to try and land it and get the control just right. You think of the moon landing when they're trying to bring in that lunar module and get it just right and don't break anything because there's no repair shop. There's no tip it over. So that will take care of the landing for you. Take off the same thing. When you look inside the cockpit, you've got two joysticks. And I don't know whether those two joysticks, one is up and down, one's in whatever direction you go, but I imagine that's what it is because you just need to go up or down and then you need to go in whatever direction.
Amazing.
So the real question here is this going to be safer than car travel? So one thing I thought of is straight away, when you're driving a car, you're all on the same plane, excuse the very bad pun, but you're on the same horizontal plane.
Yeah.
When you get up in the air, you've got a fair bit of range in terms of how high you fly. Now, I imagine these aren't pressurised, so you'd have a limit to how high you could go. Maybe just like commercial aircraft, you'd say go at the even heights in one direction and the odd heights in the other direction.
Yeah.
But again, you wouldn't have to know that because that can be simply programmed. So if you're flying in one direction, it would say we're taking you to this height because in that direction, that's the height you need to be at.
Yeah, and amazing. And I was thinking about this myself. It'd be potentially concerning if you were able to fly directly over people's houses. So I can imagine that there could be some guidance there where you need to follow the routes still with some little allowances or whatnot. But one of the things that I thought of as well is that it's only you, so you're not putting a lot of people at risk, except maybe me having my breakfast one morning and next thing you know an eVTOL lands through my kitchen and says hello. So that's a bit of a concern, but it also would defeat part of the advantage if you said follow the roads because then you want to go direct. Now, again, this isn't designed to go long routes. This is really designed to go short routes. Yeah. Following the roads on a short route would be problematic, but how safe is it? Are we going to get approval to fly these? Then if you've got cars going in every single direction, so 360 degrees of directions, how many different altitudes can you actually assign to the different directions? Because then you've got to double it because they could be going in either direction.
Correct.
Oh, hang on. No, that's still 360.
No, but you could be going, in other words, are you going in 90 degrees or 100 degrees or 180 degrees?
180 degrees. So someone going 180 degrees to you is going in the opposite direction.
Well, if you're going at 0 degrees, but then there's the 90 degrees, so going at right angles to where you're going. That might be, well, which way is this person going? Yeah,
and you've got every little fraction of a degree there too. So I think you can't have, and I'm making the rules right now. You can hear me.
Fair enough.
You just couldn't have go in any direction you want. There's got to be some rules there.
There'd be some rules, but at the moment, no.
Okay, all right.
But
because there's only about 6 people driving these things right now.
That's the thing, isn't it? So there's not many up there, but we probably need to get some rules happening pretty quickly. And
I reckon if you want to know just how crazy this could be, go and Google the time that Sweden changed from driving on the right-hand side of the road to the left-hand side of the road, and that's mayhem. Yeah. Imagine that.
I would love the world to do that, actually, but I just think the deaths, I wouldn't like to have those deaths on my hands.
Well, I'm just imagining that in the air.
Yeah.
When
let's get the rules.
Well, I'm just going to drive.
Let's get the rules right first. The Federal Aviation Authority in the US, after you do your basic training, gives you approval to fly the same as you can fly an ultralight aircraft. Now, again, there's rules around ultralight, so I imagine there'll be similar rules with these. But the difference is, an ultralight, I still need somewhere to take off and land.
Yeah.
This I can take off in my backyard.
Yeah.
So that's where it gets really interesting.
But ultralights also fly still pretty high. I imagine, these flying cars could go a bit lower than that, I hope.
You probably could. That's right. And again, you just wonder about how many times they land on someone's roof. But are we sounding a bit old-fashioned here? When people started putting in...
Well, if you land on someone's roof, you just go, ho, 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 Merry Christmas.
Always give a bag of presents. But when people...
carry presents always,
When people started putting in runways and having aircraft land, were there people out there saying, oh, my gosh, don't let that come anywhere near my house because there'll be lots of people who'll land on my rooftop instead of landing on the airport. Now, it does happen occasionally. You see that happen very rarely, but I don't know that people really worry about that. They probably worry about the noise being on a flight path more than anything else, but no, it's fascinating. So
it is.
They should be safer, is my first point, because lots of people, 1,266 people died on Australian roads last year. So that's a lot of people dying. With all the safety enhancements we've got in cars, still a lot of people dying on the roads.
And these eVTOLs, how many rotors have you got? Is it 4, is it 6, or is it
This one's
more?
got 8.
8.
And it can fly
rotors.
with less than 8.
Yeah.
It's also got a ballistic parachute. So if something does go wrong, it shoots out a parachute out the back and you float down relatively softly, maybe enough to land on my roof and dent it rather than come all the way through the roof. So that's a good thing as well. So
It's exciting times ahead.
it's fascinating times ahead, I think, and really interesting to see where we'll end up with it. I suppose the other thing to think of is one of the reasons, in my opinion, that commercial aircraft flight is so safe is because of the extremely stringent maintenance regimes that the airlines have got to adhere to. Now, cars sometimes have failures, and we're not all perfect at going and taking our car and getting it serviced at all the level of detail we need to, the same as an airline. If you started getting these and saying, right, you should maintain it a bit, it needs to have some grease on the rotors every 10 flights or whatever it might be. Right, they seem to be going, okay, I'll leave it at 15. I wonder then if that's part of the reason we get such safe flight with commercial aircraft.
Yeah.
Anyway, it's interesting times.
Okay, folks, do you have a taste for exotic delicacies? Do you enjoy your caviar beluga style, or have you how do you have your abalone? What are your thoughts about foie gras? Well, if you know about the production techniques for foie gras, then that might be enough to turn you off right there. Well, what about a new product in Sydney? It's called Forged Gras, and its production is far more PC than its traditional culinary cousin. Forged Gras may even entice some vegetarians. It's 21st century cuisine set to hit the finest restaurants. Matt, tell us more.
I must admit, liver of duck or goose is not that exciting for me.
Yeah, I know, and I've had it, and it's absolutely delicious. But then when I was told how they make it, or the preparation of the goose or the duck, it's really nasty. Don't even bother Googling it, folks.
I think it's a high starch diet they feed it, is it, to try and increase
it involves
the liver?
force feeding.
Right.
Yeah, and so I'm just going to draw the line there.
So we've talked about lab meat before. I think the first story we did from anywhere around the world was from Israel, and don't hold me to that, but that's from my memory where...
Yeah, I remember we had a conversation years back.
Yeah, that's right, where Israel was producing lab-grown meat, and there were certain restaurants around the world. I think Singapore was the first place in the world where you could go into a restaurant and buy some lab meat. So lab meat is not brand new, but the different styles of production and the way it's being done are quite fascinating. So we started off with, let's try and produce lab meat. Now, the reports I read of that, I haven't tasted any, but the reports I read said basically tastes okay, the texture's not quite the same. And when I looked at pictures, it kind of looked like a bunch of mince meat rather than steak. So it was a bit different there. And I did ask some people at the time that were vegetarians, okay, how do you feel now? How do you feel that this is no longer an animal that's been slaughtered and then that meat has been put to through a production process and then ends up on your table? Is it okay?
Well, effectively, it's one cell has been taken.
That's
from
right.
That
So
animal. The animal doesn't know any better or worse for it. And
and I got a mixed response from people about that whole concept of lab-grown meat. But surely for some vegetarians, it would be, okay, I'm pretty cool with that now. Let's have a go at that.
And I can see it. But people are saying, but agriculture. We've got agriculture. We've got to support that. And they're right. I think there will always be a place for it. But in a world that is going to be screaming out for resources very shortly, this could be a more economical way of making it, and it will go and complement the agriculture that
That's
we've
my
got.
logic as well. And we have got 8 billion people to feed.
Well, soon to be 9.
That's right. So this is fascinating. What I find interesting about this is they don't take any part of any goose or any duck or any animal. They're using quail cells in a nutrient-rich liquid, so Japanese quail cells. So no animals had to die for this.
No animals had to die. That's
right.
a wonderful thing.
That's right. So they start with that, and they basically grow it in the lab. And already this from Sydney is being sold in Singapore and Hong Kong. The fascinating part here, I find, is that it's actually illegal to sell this in Australia at this stage. So
it's operating out of Sydney, but we can't sell it here.
That's right. Export. Talk about an export-only market.
Unless you've got in the black market somewhere.
That's right.
Some of that
I'm sure this company is not doing that.
No. Okay. Sorry. Backing up.
That's right. So they're trying to get some regulatory approval in this country. So probably by the end of next year, you'll be able to actually buy this in Australia. But you've got some countries around the world that are competing in this space. There are about 150 companies already producing some form of lab meat, some form of produced rather than grown meat. And so it's a booming exercise. Probably by the year 2035, the estimation is this whole market, this global cultured meat market, will reach $20 billion. So it's a big market and lots of changes there. It's not just about, I imagine that what you try and do is just say, right, there's my favourite steak, let's make something identical to that in the lab. But it seems like they're doing things a little bit differently. And this particular company in Sydney is trying to do things where they're mixing in different things. So in this example, they're using 60% cultured quail, but garlic, onion, brandy and butter are mixed in with the whole production process. So that's fascinating. They also create novel meats with different tastes, nutritional profiles. So, for example, they've got a steak that tastes more like venison, but then they've got lots of omega-3 in it. So you should be able to produce healthier meat. And I must admit, people get excited about things like Wagyu and the marbling, and I just don't get it. I just think that's fat. And I try and buy meat without the fat, and then people go, look at the marbling. I go, that's just fat. And please send in, if there's some difference between marbling and fat that I don't know about, let me know about it. But this meat you could produce without the fat, without the marbling, which I think would be a good thing, but some people might not think so.
But I think it's also part of it. I mean, the fatty flavour to the to the foie gras is part of the part of the appeal.
Yeah, that's right. I think that's the thing with grown meats, with naturally grown meats, that I think that's part of it, is the fat is all part of the taste. So for some of these lab meat producers, they've probably got to introduce some fat or equivalent of to really attract that overall market. But it is quite fascinating. I can see more developments here. I can see different things happening around the world. And before we know it, it will be, you've got a steak that was grown on a cow. That's quite fascinating. Look at that. It's interesting.
How quaint.
That's right.
Bunnings is pushing back on privacy laws over the facial recognition technology that they wish to roll out across their stores nationwide. They're pleading that it's all in the name of consumer safety, but the OAIC is crying foul play. Matt, how is this technological tussle panning out?
Well, it is quite interesting, and I think the big mistake made by Bunnings here was they didn't tell us. They've been using facial recognition technology since 2018, and they started finding they had some people who were being unpleasant to their staff, maybe violent in the store, maybe stealing things. And sure, CCTV, most people expect a business to have CCTV around there to catch these things, but they thought there's got to be a better way. Let's prevent it before it happens, rather than just go, oh, yep, there's a video, there's a known offender, we've seen him before, and you go through the process. And even when the police go and get the guy and say, right, we've got this video, here you are stealing this, or whatever it might be, it's too late. They never get that product back. Or if there's been violence in the store, that might traumatise a staff member. So they said, we can use this technology. It's out there. Why not? So they set up facial recognition technology across their stores, and they added people to the list if they had an incident involving someone. So if I walked into the store, started abusing a staff member, whatever, then they might go, right, there's that image there. Let's add that person to our database. And the database consisted of about 500 people by the time this has all become public. So they had 500 people, assuming not you and I in that list, that were deemed high risk in their list of people. So when someone walked in the store, there'd be some form of alert, I imagine, go off, and a manager would be told, okay, here comes Matthew again, he's a troublemaker, go and escort him from the store, he's not welcome in Bunnings. Right. That might be a confrontation in itself, but essentially they had that, or maybe they just had someone follow them around and keep an eye on them and make sure there was some protection for other staff members. But ultimately, that all sounded, to me, reasonable and okay, except they just didn't tell anyone.
Yeah.
I think that was a mistake made.
And in the current climate, people are very, very defensive about that sort of stuff, aren't they?
Yeah, they are. And you're quite right. The Office of the Australian Information Commissioner said that Bunnings violated privacy laws, which is pretty strict or pretty extreme. They're appealing that, of course, because they want to pay their solicitors more money, and the two sets of solicitors can stand off there. But on the technology side, they had some pretty good technology, and it was actually picking up, it had recognised someone compared to their database within about 0.004 of a second. So that's pretty quick.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I see you coming through the car park.
That's right. Before you knew that you were entering the store, they knew you were there. So I thought that was pretty impressive from a technology side. And, of course, this was shared across all their stores. I imagine that it was uploaded to each store rather than accessing some sort of central database, because I can't see them doing it that quickly if it was going over the internet and dragging that information out. So I thought that was reasonable. I thought that was pretty impressive. But I think if they just had a sign under their CCTV that said facial recognition in use, some people would have said, I'm not going to Bunnings because they've got FRT being used, and that'd be okay. But the rest of people go, yeah, whatever. If they've got my face, I'm not doing anything wrong. So be it. And sure, they would have lost some customers, not many, but now I think they've lost the trust of a lot of customers.
Yeah.
And I don't know what it is, but people get very antsy about facial recognition.
Yeah, I know. And well, this is probably the subject for a whole other episode. I guess we could probably fill that with our 2 cents worth there. But, yeah, as you say, if you're not doing anything wrong, you've got nothing to really worry about. But then people would say, but I think you do have something to worry about, even if you're not doing something wrong. Yeah.
And we've seen mistakes. We've talked about it before, about mistakes being made. But then I started to wonder about the supermarkets. And when you do the self-checkout, as you're picking up your products and scanning them, you'll see a little video of your own face.
Yeah.
And obviously they're doing that in case you decide that you don't want to pay for your goods today and you just pick up your bag and walk out the door. They've got a little video of you. A little tip here for thieves: don't go to the self-checkout counter if you're going to steal the stuff. Just walk out with the bag so your video's not on there. Yeah. But then many people scan their rewards type cards, and you could quite easily, and I've got no evidence to suggest this, but if the supermarkets were also using facial recognition, then they'd know about your purchases because they know there's your picture, there's you, and there's your purchase on your rewards card. So when you walk into the store, it'd be very easy for them to send you a text. Oh, James, we noticed you just walked into ABC Supermarket. We've got a special today on chocolates because we know you bought some last time. And you go, I feel like you know too much about me. Yeah, that's right. So there's all those possibilities.
Yeah.
And that's where maybe people get a bit concerned about the facial recognition. Yeah. I think we've come to accept CCTV and accept that that's used if someone does something wrong. But facial recognition seems a bit too preemptive, and that does scare people a little bit. Oh,
look, and we've also got mobile phones that are taking shots of our face all the time, and they've got facial recognition technology on them all as well, haven't they? What's happening out once it goes into your phone? Where's it being sent after that?
Yeah, that's right. It'd be hard to travel internationally too, wouldn't it, if you weren't happy with your face being photographed somewhere? Maybe we feel more comfortable with governments. Maybe what people got a bit annoyed about was Bunnings being a private company capturing that data. Did they take the same care as maybe the government when they take your photo when you go through customs?
Or did people simply see it as an opportunity?
To jump all over someone?
Yeah.
Maybe.
Perhaps. How do you like your supercomputers, folks? Me, I like them fast. And when I say that, I mean super fast. I'm talking super fast computers that'll do their algorithms even before you hit enter. And that's how fast I like them. What have you got for me, Matt, in the way of supercomputers?
I've got El Capitan.
Hey!
Not quite as fast as you'd like, but it's got some serious computing power. Now, we've got to have an SI unit for computer power, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
So
swimming pools? No.
No, not quite. We measure the speed of a supercomputer in floating point operations per second. So basically, how fast it can do some maths problems.
Right.
And so called flops. And don't be confused with the flops per second because the S stands for second. So flops is the...
So it's not like ATM machine? And
no, correct.
Sorry, it is just like that. We just
flops.
Say flops, right.
Yeah, not flops per second, it's flops. So 2022, I think it was, Frontier surpassed ExaFLOPs, so got to exascale. So they got to 1 billion floating point operations per second. So that's pretty impressive. Now, that's been the holder of the title of the fastest supercomputer since 2022, but now we've got El Capitan 1.742 exaflops. So
it's put the other one to shame.
It's embarrassing.
It's embarrassing.
How can it call itself a supercomputer, I say? There is a listing, of course, of the top 500 supercomputers.
Probably not.
That's right.
Not very well.
Top 500 supercomputers across the world are ranked, and obviously all ranked by their flops. Now, what do we do with all this computing power? Sure, I like your idea that tell me what I'm going to ask before I even ask it. Give me the answer before I press the button. I actually thought surely they could tell me the lotto numbers for next week. That seems reasonable for a supercomputer to put all that power to good use.
Yeah,
it would pay for the supercomputer, surely. So do that a few times. Maybe just get the weather right tomorrow. That'd be a really interesting thing. But no, it can't do that.
Can't do that.
This one in particular was built with the National Nuclear Security Administration in mind. So it was built for them. They were the custom client there. And they're going to use it to basically check the effectiveness of US nuclear deterrence without having actually physical nuclear tests, which sounds like a reasonable thing.
Right.
When you start doing simulations, which they've been doing before on their old supercomputer, which is not Frontier, which is another supercomputer.
Too slow.
Too slow. It would take, they do a 3D nuclear explosion simulation, and that would take months.
Oh, really?
That's a big calculation.
I figured you'd hit enter and it'd happen, and then this other new supercomputer would somehow eclipse that. But no, months of computing.
So can you imagine that? Can you imagine saying, I've just hit enter, and now
Not only can I make a cup of tea,
that's right.
but I can afford to go on that holiday I've been waiting to have.
But I hope I didn't just make a mistake in my code somewhere towards the end of that, because you come back.
So you know when you hit print and then you go to the printer and it's not there and
That's
you go,
right.
what did I forget to do? I made a mistake somewhere.
Or syntax error. I can just imagine you go for your 1 month holiday, you come back to check on it, and it says syntax error in line 7. And you go, I should have checked that. How do I check that first? So this one, reducing it from months, probably will be down to maybe a day.
Right.
Depending on the exact calculation we're talking about here.
Well, if you want to know what sort of nuclear destruction you're going to create, you need that.
You need it a bit faster, don't you?
Yeah.
Because you might want to try different simulations. They do often use them for climate modelling. That's a common thing supercomputers are used for. So when we see those reports about 1 degree, what will that do by the year 2040, those type of things, there's often a supercomputer in the background doing some of those calculations. And drug testing, drug discovery, a lot of simulators are doing that type of testing as well. So rather than say, let's get 100 volunteers and we'll try this drug out on them, they say, let's run some simulations through a supercomputer as well.
Yeah,
but this one will be solely used by the National Nuclear Security Administration, and it will basically go through and work on that. Now, the other interesting thing is that we know Moore's Law, I should know when it was quoted, but about 1968, 1967
Something
it was quoted.
like that, and it's about the doubling of computer processing power.
Well, yes, so it was basically about that. It was talking specifically about the number of microprocessors on a chip. So it kind of equated to doubling of computer power. It started off at 18 months, but then really it got to about 2 years. So about every 2 years, many things in computers doubled. And I used to find that when we're doing networks for clients, we'd be talking about a new server and we'd say, let's see how much data you used. Yep, you quadrupled that in a 3-year time frame. And that was a rough sort of gauge because it would double in 2 years, and say 4 years it would double again. But you'd probably find that 3 to 4 year time frame it would quadruple. The computing power got better as well, but things are slowing down now because a lot of the way they increased the processing power was to get smaller and smaller layers on chips and get those processing chips smaller, even though you had more power on them. And we're kind of getting to the stage now where it's getting a bit too small.
Well, it's getting so small that you need a gap. You need a slight little gap in your chip between the PN and the NP junctions or whatever. And we're getting to a point where we can't have any gap at all.
That's right. When we start talking about this one,
it won't work.
Well, 8 nanometers, and this one's 7 nanometers, and so you start to get then those level. So how do you build these faster computers? Well, they're going back to the stage now where they're just larger, so physically larger, and obviously expensive and energy intensive. So to give you an idea, El Capitan is expected to use about 30 megawatts of power.
Oh, wow.
That's a lot.
Goodness me.
That's more than me leaving the lights on overnight.
Yeah, that's right. Oh, the bill.
The bill, that's right. So it is quite fascinating. The next time we're expecting to have this surpassed is probably maybe 2026. They think this will probably last for 2 years. There's a few supercomputers under development now. I imagine you don't put
But then
them
we're
together.
looking at quantum computing as well.
Well, that's the next thing, isn't it? Does it change the whole game? Absolutely.
So
if
we're
they
still
can just
using
get right.
conventional computer technology for El Capitan.
Which is why it's getting bigger and bigger. But if we can get quantum computing working, then that's a game changer, and away we go again.
El Capitan, good, cool name. And in another story that drags a tech solution straight out of the pages of a biology textbook, aeronautical engineers are looking to improve the way we fly by copying birds' tails. They've designed Pigeon Bot 2, And it's a robotic bird that will hopefully teach us how to get around in an aircraft without tall vertical tails. Matt, this is going to ruffle some feathers, is it not?
Oh, please. And here was me thinking the vertical tail fin was just a spot to put the logo of the airline on. But apparently it's used in the flying.
Yes.
Apparently it helps keep the aircraft going straight, helps with a bit of side-to-side motion.
Put the logo now.
Yeah, I know. Imagine that. But again, as you said, we see lots of stories where we take nature, or when I say we, the proverbial we, take nature and go, let's see that bird. It doesn't have a tail fin. How does it do that? And a bird, if you do use your AI binoculars we've spoken about before and focus on those birds, you'll see.
What sort of bird?
Yeah, who knows? Yeah. I'll tell you when I get my binoculars. If you see that tail fin, it just moves around ever so slightly. So they basically built a drone, a bird simulator, that they can actually use and change the shape of that tail fin to help control the flight. So rather than having a vertical tail fin, which has got a bit of drag associated with it, you've
got a tail that spreads out and then modifies itself.
And they built this with 9 servo motors in the tail and then said, let's see if we can fly this thing. And they can fly it and keep it level and keep it stable to the point where they're saying maybe we could build an aircraft like this without a vertical tail fin.
And save on all that steel and aluminium.
Well, drag as well. There's a fair amount of drag. They're talking about maybe being able to improve the fuel efficiency of an aircraft by about 5% if you got rid of the tail fin. So that sounds quite interesting because you can imagine the horizontal fins have got a hole to go through basically because it's been cut from the front wings to a certain extent and the whole aircraft. So you can probably reduce that drag and still just get the direction you need. Now, there are some aircraft, some military aircraft that don't have a vertical tail fin, mainly because they want to get away from radar detection, but they'll control some of that flight by using some drag on the main wings, which again then that introduces more drag, which is not what you're after. But this is fascinating. I watched a video of it and just watching how the servo motors were changing the shape of that tail fin, you go, wow, that's incredible. And you think, well, birds do that by themselves. So maybe birds are pretty clever as well. But it is interesting. We keep looking to nature. We keep looking at different things in nature and say, how do we copy that? Let's see what we can do. And here's another example. But it would look a bit freaky, wouldn't it? Imagine turning up and looking at your aircraft you got on board. You went, okay, I kind of get those horizontal wings there, but that thing at the back, that looks a bit woolsey compared to the good structure of a tail fin and a couple of horizontal wings there.
It's just amazing. Look, I'm waiting for them to design a plane like a bumblebee. Have you ever seen a bumblebee fly in slow motion?
The wings are incredibly fast, aren't they? Yeah, I'm not sure I'd feel that comfortable about that, especially when you see these wings flapping on the sides incredibly fast. But we also, in the early days of flying, you saw lots of people trying to flap wings just like a bird.
Yeah, watch that old black and white footage of what they were doing with their amazing flying contraptions.
That's right.
They didn't actually fly very well.
No, they didn't at all.
The problem with running focus groups when you perform research is that people can be so difficult. People have strong personalities and, let's face it, people can be needy. Perhaps for efficiency, saving time wasting with some late arrivals and problems with early departures, etc., perhaps it would be just easier to enlist a focus group of AI avatars and cut out the crap. Matt, is this the direction that human testing is really going? AI focus groups?
I think it's a great idea. I've seen focus groups. I've been involved with different focus groups.
Well, you wouldn't have to wait for them to argue things out or whatnot or discuss stuff. You just say, I want this tested, and bang.
There's your answer, and you get a good representation of society. And there's a great episode of Utopia where they were doing – Utopia is an ABC comedy, but a bit too close to real life.
One of those ones you can only watch an episode at a time, otherwise you just go crazy.
That's right. And you think, is this really how government works? And you probably go, probably. But they had a focus group there, and they were talking about something with focus groups, and you just went around the room and you had people talking about things, and they all completely misunderstood the focus. Now, it was a comedy, so they're being deliberate, but they completely misunderstood the level of government they were talking about and staying on track for the actual question being asked. And it was very funny, but also I thought, I've seen focus groups where people do get off track and they do completely misunderstand.
Close to the bone, yeah.
So to get a good focus group, you need a reasonable sample size, especially if you're trying to get a focus group for a large population. So often you're trying to get a focus group of hundreds, maybe 1,000 people, and all the things that you talked about, all the complications with that and with trying to keep them on track and getting the people and paying the people, all those things are complicated. So some people at Stanford University said, well, surely we can simulate 1,000 individuals. So the first thing they did was they got 1,000 individuals. They spent hours interviewing these people while AI is listening away to get some ideas and to just get feedback on what these people thought, how they thought, what their opinions were. Then they said, okay, you've now got 1,000 people that are a cross-section of society. Let's see if we took those 1,000 as an AI and let's go and ask them a bunch of questions and use them as a focus group. When they did that, they found that they got the answers back from the focus group compared to AI at about an 85% match. So the AI group wasn't far off the real focus group. Now, could you use this to develop public policy much faster? Absolutely. And that's what I thought would be exciting about it. You're a government and you think, we should try doing blah. Wonder how that's going to fly with the public. Okay, let's, as you said, feed it in. You get the answer 5 seconds later. Okay, let's go ahead with that. Let's keep progressing that. Or let's shelve that because that's a terrible idea. Or that's going to lose us too many votes. We'll do it at the beginning of the election cycle rather than the end of the election cycle.
But if you can get AI to use 1,000 people, there's no reason why you can't get it to interview 50,000 people or 1,000,000 people.
Well, and you probably get a diminishing rate of return. I know when you talk to people who do surveys of people, they have a number where they go, we're at the point now where it's, say, plus or minus 5%.
Yeah.
And as you keep increasing, so you might get that at 1,000 people. At 2,000, it might be plus or minus 4.8%. So you start to get a diminishing rate of return. But logically, yes, you could start to build a bigger focus group, but you could then get focus groups that focused on different areas, so different areas that they might live, different parts of the population, different people, whether it be males or females or different ages. So you could build up a range of subsets and say, okay, here I am, an AI company. I've got these various subsets. Who would you like to run your policy ideas past? I can feed it into whichever AI group you want, and there's your answer. So it does sound quite interesting. And how accurate are focus groups really? One of the things I find fascinating is that you don't really get them to understand the full complexity. But AI would do the same. It wouldn't necessarily understand the full complexity because sometimes if you say to someone, I heard the government's going to do this, and everyone goes, oh, that's a terrible idea. And then, well, what it actually means is A, B, and C that end up at this. And then you think, oh, well, that's not such a bad idea. But a focus group probably doesn't get into that nuanced conversation and those details. It's just the headline act. What do you think of this? Yep, that's a great idea or that's a terrible idea. So it would be interesting to see how
humans
it
are
works.
very good at gut reactions, aren't they?
They are. So would AI be as good at gut reaction? Would they get the full context of that?
Do you want the gut reaction?
Maybe not. Maybe you do. Yeah. Maybe you just want what people are going to think initially. Interesting.
We live with friction every day. It's that hidden force that we've learned to take for granted because friction helps things to work. But for physicists and engineers alike, friction can be a royal pain in the bum. It reduces the efficiency of energy transfers and transformations and creates heat, which has its own problems. Getting rid of friction is a big deal. And if you can create a truly slick surface, well, you might be just the envy of the entire lab. Matt, material science. What do we say about material science?
That's the future, James. You tell your students that's the future.
I was telling them today.
That's right. There you go. Well, it's interesting because this is not even just material science. This is all about the coatings. So it's not just the material that you make the product, the device from, but how you coat it. So, for example, in a jet engine, you've got temperatures over 1,000 degrees Celsius. You've got metal in that jet engine that would start to become a little bit goopy at 1,000 degrees Celsius. So what do? You put a ceramic coating over those metal components that can handle more than 1,000 degrees Celsius. And so the ceramic coating's taking that heat, so the metal underneath isn't getting to those temperatures. So fantastic. In this particular story, one of the stories I was reading, if we could improve the coating in a jet engine, for example, we could actually increase the engine temperatures, and just a 30 degrees Celsius change in engine temperatures could make that engine 8% more efficient. So let's get a coating.
So what does that mean? 8% more efficient. So less fuel.
8% less fuel.
Yeah, right.
To produce the same amount of power, running it hotter means you could actually save 8% of your fuel. So that sounds pretty cool. And that's not changing the structure of the jet engine. That's not changing how it operates. That's just by saying, let's put this better coating on and then we can run it a bit hotter.
Amazing.
It is quite amazing. Then they do things where you have durability testing. So they want to have something that's going to be long-lasting, put a coating on it, and then they have a device they call a woodpecker device. And it actually just goes around randomly tapping like a woodpecker with a diamond tip and basically doing that hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of times to simulate what happens out in a real world. And again, if I pick the example of a jet engine, you're flying through the air fairly fast. You've got all of this air being drawn in, and anything else that might be in the air gets drawn in. And sometimes I've seen propellers impellers, I think they're called, on a jet engine, the blades, where they're just pitted, and they're constantly pitted by all these things hitting it. Again, with that maintenance, they've got to replace them on a regular basis. When you start talking about satellites, you want to coat the gears and bearings to make sure they last a long time, because a satellite that might be up there isn't quite so easy just to drop back into the service centre and stick a new one in and then send it back up there again. It's a pretty big job, or they probably just let it fall away and put up a new one to replace it. So you've got all these different coatings. Reduce friction, fantastic, although we do need friction for various things, but reduce friction in some examples, increase the temperatures, increase the durability, a whole range of things. So the next time you're talking to students, say material science, but look at the coatings on those material science as well, because they make a big difference.
Yeah, and so it's just breaking down a material into smaller components and working with those smaller components to refine those. Amazing.
It is. And even,
just
for example,
amazing technology.
It is in a car park. Say, for example, you've got a shopping centre with an underground or an undercover car park. You don't want a fire to have the whole area collapse. So you might have steel in some of those structures to support the whole area, but then you might have a coating around those. It's a fire retardant coating. So it doesn't get hot enough for that metal to start to collapse or not have its same strength capacity. So there's so many different areas we use different coatings.
When the Concorde taxied across the tarmac at Filton Airport in Bristol back in 2003, the book closed on commercial supersonic flight. While military technology continues to grow and push fighter pilots well past Mark III, supersonic fun for ordinary folks like you and I, well, that remains a pipe dream. Or does it, Matt?
I never flew on the Concorde.
But you wanted to.
I wanted to. I didn't think, I better hurry up and get there.
You assumed it'd just go on forever and ever?
Exactly.
And eventually you get from, what is it, New York to Paris?
Yep.
Or is it was it London to Paris?
Oh, I think.
London to New York.
London to New York it might have been.
Yeah,
I think they did a
yeah.
Paris one as well.
Yeah.
But so it seemed like one of those things. Yeah, I'll do that one day. I didn't think there'd be a bit that fell off the plane and hit the fuel tank and caused a fire and then retired the Concorde. And so I'm waiting for my supersonic flight. I'm not planning on joining the Air Force, so I'm not going to be able to get to go in one of those jet fighters. So,
but still holding out.
My next opportunity is coming. Dawn Aerospace's Aurora Mark II just did a supersonic flight. So this is something that will be, hopefully, a commercial aircraft that you and I will be able to go and fly on one day. Wow. So this is on the 12th of November 2024, so very recently. It achieved speeds of Mach 1.1. Mach or Mark? What do you reckon? Mach?
I would say Mark.
Mark, okay. I'll go with Mark. I was thinking, as I said, I went, maybe I should say Mark on that one. So Mark 1.1, so obviously 1.1 is the speed, 1 times the speed of sound. Now, I always am intrigued by that because the speed of sound changes with altitude, with temperature. Mm-hmm. So where do they measure the Mark 1? Is that at the altitude and temperature where it's at?
I would have thought they would have a standard that would be at sea level.
Yeah.
And then they relate those speeds back to that.
20 degrees Celsius, sea level. Here's what we classify as the speed of sound for Mark calculations. Okay. I'm happy with that. I don't know if that's right. But
I just made that up too, folks. That right. Came off the top of my head.
It sounds pretty good. It also went to an altitude of 82,500 feet. I know we're using imperial there, 25,146 metres, but obviously aircraft around the world typically talk in feet, not metres. And that's probably about double. I know when I've watched the screen on commercial aircraft, 38,000 feet is about the top of what I see when I'm flying in between countries, for example. And I assume they're doing that because they want to reduce the air resistance. So they're getting up to the thinner and thinner air so they can go faster without things hitting the aircraft like air to slow it down a little bit. So that'd be pretty interesting being at those sort of heights. It actually got to 66,000 feet in 118.6 seconds. That sounds pretty fast to me.
Wow.
There was a record that was set back in the 70s for that speed or for that height reached in that time, and this beat that record. So that's significant. So if they keep going down this path, and they're using more a jet engine rather than, a same as you would have in a spacecraft engine, so like a burning jet engine or burning fuel rather than a normal commercial jet engine to use that. So essentially, this might be where we end up with to get to that point with commercial aircraft. Now, they could use this for putting satellites up into space as well, a whole range of things it could be used for, but I want to get on a supersonic plane, James.
Yeah, that's right. Bring the Concorde back with rocket engines.
Or bring something like this back as well. So it is historic, this flight, and essentially civilian supersonic aviation might be coming back with something like this.
But I think, we've got a civilian space flight happening these days too, haven't we? What's Bezos's
Branson
Blue Origin, is it?
Yeah. So you've got some of those as well, but I don't think they go at supersonic speeds to get you there. They just put you up into a height that gives you the ability to say that.
Well, if they can do it, I still reckon they can do supersonic commercial flights.
They should be doing it.
Building a battery into the structure of an EV was a masterstroke and quickly became the norm in EV manufacture. Mercedes-Benz have gone another step further and are now painting their exteriors in solar paint. Matt, solar paint? How long has this been a thing?
Well, it's not quite a thing yet in terms of go and buy a car with this solar paint.
Right.
But the other answer that we often talk about, if you don't know the answer in science, material science is where you should be going, and surface area is the other answer you should give when you don't know what the answer is. And people sometimes say to me, you've got an EV, why don't you just stick a solar panel on the roof, take one off the roof of your house and stick it on the roof of your car, and then you can drive forever without having to worry about charge up. And, of course, the answer I give is...
It doesn't work like that.
Yeah, it's not enough surface area. But Mercedes-Benz said, sure, if you just had your roof as a solar panel, not great. But what about if you had the whole car as a solar panel? And they made an estimation to say a small SUV, for example, would be about 11 square metres of surface area. Let's make all of that into a solar panel, which sounds pretty clumsy, doesn't it, to try and wrap around something around that to have a solar panel?
I think it sounds clever.
It does, if you can do that, and they're doing that now with a solar paint.
That's great.
So this particular paint, not that thick, about 5 micrometers thick, so not too bad in terms of its thickness, doesn't add a lot of weight or thickness to the overall car, but it would add approximately 12,000 kilometres of charge per year. So that's reasonable.
And that does count.
That counts. It'd be interesting though, wouldn't it? Because you'd say to your boss who you've just progressed to the company and say, you've now got an undercover car park. Oh no, I want one out in the sun, boss, because when I'm parked at the work all day, whatever I used getting to work this morning, I've just charged up again, ready to drive back home. So that'd be interesting. Driving along the open road, you're not going to get enough charge to allow you to keep driving forever, but it's certainly going to extend your range of your car by a little bit. But I think logically what you do is you just park it in the sun as often as you could. At work, come home, don't park at the garage, park it out in the sun.
So I often think about that. We've got solar cells at our place, but we never park the car at our house during the middle of the day.
No.
It's always at our workplace.
Yeah, that's right. Whereas this, you'd have your solar cell with you. Now, what they've done that I think is incredibly clever is when we talk about some other types of solar panels, we've talked about flexible ones you roll out. The problem seems to be often with those is the efficiency. But with this solar paint, they're saying about 20% efficiency, which compares quite favourably to rooftop solar, which is maybe around 25%. So it's not too bad from that perspective. So what a clever idea. I'd give it 2 years before I can walk into a showroom and say, give me that Mercedes-Benz with the solar paint on it, thanks very much. So it's not there yet, but it's great to see they're thinking about it.
What they're working on, and others will follow.
That's right. And Germans are very good at making things work well. So if Mercedes is doing it, who knows, maybe Audi's doing it, maybe we get a Porsche covered in this sort of paint as well. So it seems to me like a really clever way to go, and then it will filter down to lots of different models. Yeah.
And with that, folks, I can feel the uncontrollable urge to curl up on the couch and take a power nap. If you're listening to this podcast in the car and are feeling the same, then maybe think hard about the merits in pulling off to the side of the road first. Matt, thanks for another cracking tech talk.
That's all right. I'm now going to go and get a focus group to see what they think of the idea of me flying an aircraft after a couple of days of simulator training. What does the general population think about that idea?
No! Well, I'm off to dream sweet dreams of robotic pigeons, coated in solar paint, travelling faster than the speed of sound. What an amazing world we live in. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Tech Talk with Matthew Dickerson, streamed coast to coast and far across the deep blue sea, all thanks to the modern miracle of the fabulous internet. I'm your host, James Eddy, and I'm delighted to be a part of this tidy little podcast from week to week. I hope you enjoy it just as much. Until next time, take care and we'll see you soon.